Now, according to Cox Automotive, they collect data on the sales of a lot of vehicles, and brands like Toyotas, Hondas, Lexus vehicles did extremely well and generally do. And therefore, sales usually come and go fairly quickly. They hover around that 20, 30, 35 days supply. The vehicle shows up and it's pretty much gone. And we all know delivery on time, and Toyota and Lexus were doing that, and they were able to manage to keep a lot of their vehicles flowing. They didn't have a lot of inventory on the lot. But there's a lot of brands that often miss the mark. They overorder, and next thing you know, it's a big gamble having too much inventory and they can't sell it. There's some manufacturers that have overshot that target and then wound up with thousands of vehicles on the car lots across the nation and could not sell them. Where did those vehicles go? Many from Stellantis were problem sellers. Many from the JLR groups were problem sellers. And a vehicle like the Challenger, for example, had an extraordinarily high day supply inventory. In other words, if they stopped production today, give it a year, and they still wouldn't be totally sold out of inventory. The sales were just trickling by. So cars that miss the mark are generally poor sellers, and manufacturers are looking ways to unload them. They have to look at one key tactic: incentives. Lots of incentives, like this, for example, 4.99% on this Macan Electric lease, or this Cayenne, or even Taycans. Many manufacturers struggle with selling their cars, so they have to incentivize it. They give lease finance rates. They might even see as low as 0%, or hold back a couple months, say defer your payments for 6 months or for a couple of months. Whether sometimes it's right at the dealer level, or often the manufacturer even gets involved if it's a really chronically poor selling vehicle. You'll see incentives all over the place. Ford's notorious for that. We also saw Stellantis, Rams. They were not selling, neither were Jeep product. Now we're starting to see Jeep hack their prices off. And according to Cox Automotive, we've also seen their day supply up over 150, 160 day supply. Some of the industry's worst sellers. So the incentives have to come, and the manufacturers and the dealers want to start pushing their products, and they do it by giving better finance rate and even throwing in some extra. And further incentives may reach out to the actual salespeople or employees of the business. Employee discounts, where employees can invest in some of these products at a discounted dollar amount. A lot of these dealers, remember, would rather sell it to an employee even at cost, is better than taking a loss or sitting on that vehicle for 2 or 3 or 4 more months where they can't sell his vehicle. This car, for example, has also been sitting here for months, and this is clearly one of those vehicles that would be a great candidate for an employee buying discount. And if incentives aren't cutting the mustard, then the next approach is actually turning some of these brand new vehicles into a used vehicle. Used vehicles often sell a lot easier. There's a lot more flexibility for the dealers to sell them at their own price, and as well, they can, blend them into their inventory. Often a lot of these vehicles turn into the general manager's ride-around vehicles. Some senior staff members may actually enjoy a ride as well. So some of those vehicles, the dealerships themselves will actually purchase the vehicle, put it into their fleet, and those numbers are skewing the sales. It does help them meet their quota, and as well, it serves to get some of those new vehicles sold. They also use them for service loaners. So most dealerships will have a service department, something like this, and often they'll have a few vehicles floating around. So when people need their vehicle serviced, or they drop their vehicles off, that there's a loaner waiting there for them. I mean, you'll get vehicles like this, a service loaner. They might have 1 or 2 of these trucks like this. They may have smaller vehicles like this that they can lend out, so customers actually feel good about dropping their vehicle off here, and it seems like a benefit to a lot of the buyers and owners of that particular brand. And taking some of the less popular models, maybe the colors, the styles, or inventory that's been sitting on the lot for a while, they might just decide, you know what, this one's been sitting here 6 months, why don't we just put it into our fleet? The third tactic that a lot of dealers are using to try to sell cars that aren't selling particularly well, they have to think about the demographics. While every manufacturer sells a broad spectrum of different models, sometimes certain places, certain geographies just don't do well. California, for example, is going to sell better convertibles, 2-wheel drive vehicles, whereas conversely, if you're dealing with northern climates, lots of snow on the ground like this, you're probably going to do better with trucks, pickup trucks, and that's where you have to start focusing. If you have inventory that isn't selling, sometimes these dealers are going cross-city, cross-state, cross-country, and even across the borders to try to move some of their inventory. They may move sporty vehicles. There might be somebody in California or Florida that might want that sporty car that somebody in the north has that they just can't unload. So often these dealers are negotiating back and forth, and sometimes it's a swap. Sometimes they're just buy one off the other. But usually it just means that they're looking for other opportunities to move that vehicle along somewhere. Somebody might want that. And if you can't sell it in your local geography, you may have to look somewhere else. And if this car hasn't sold by then and things are getting very desperate, no matter what they do, they can't incentivize it, nobody wants it, nobody's buying it, and clearly it's just not moving, there's no interest. After 6, 7, 8 months, what does the dealer do with a vehicle like this? Well, that takes us to the fourth option and the fourth tactic that a lot of dealers are looking at to get rid of that weak selling inventory. Quite often they'll take it to the auction. The auction house is a place where a lot of dealers push come to shove, when things get desperate, they have a place that they could potentially unload their inventory. There's a couple of options. There's the open auction and there's the closed auction. And the one, the closed auction, I worked years ago for a Ford dealer auction. Those are often repos. Those are also Ford Canada vehicles that came and went through the auction house. There was a few independents, but generally it was a closed auction. There's also an open auction where a lot of non-brand dealers often can show up and buy some of those vehicles. This is in fact a place where dealers can get rid of their vehicle, usually at a bit of a loss. Often they're not making money there, and in most cases they're losing money. But losing money a little bit on one transaction or two transactions is better than having a vehicle on the lot that's been sitting there for 8 months, 10 months, 12 months. I've shown you in the past 2022 and 2023 vehicles that are still on car lots, brand new, old stock, plastic on the seats, still not selling because of the price, color, trim, whatever. Nobody wants it. And so that's an option for a lot of these dealers, to send it packing through the auction house. You go to the open auction, that's where a lot of these rental shops are getting their inventory. You go to a lot of these rental shops, you'll see those plain Jane cars, maybe the nasty trim level, maybe the color is just as boring or bland, and you often wondered, well, a lot of them are ordered by fleet, but there are some that they pick up from the auction. They pay a monthly charge, no different than you and I. When you're buying your new car and you pay it on a loan, it's monthly payments that you're paying every month on top of the interest charges start to accrue and starts to add up to profit loss. And these dealers don't want to do that. After 60 to 90 days, if the vehicle's still on the lot, they're getting more pushy, and some of those incentives are starting to ramp up. The worst part is a lot of times cars that you see on the lot aren't the beginning and the end. A lot of these OEMs actually have these mega lots where they store extra inventory that's not popular, not selling, and they'll have these spots in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes a lot of people don't even know they exist. And a lot of these vehicles that aren't selling are stuck in these spots. So what happens if they can't incentivize it, nobody's buying it, and they have nowhere to go? Well, there's a lot of unpopular models. A lot of EVs have been struggling with sales. A lot of unpopular models, vehicles that are just outdated, unpopular, unreliable. Ask Stellantis. But ultimately, there's other options. If they can't get rid of them through the auction or otherwise, quite often what ends up happening is they get sent to international markets. Asia, South America, maybe even Europe. Spots that they can juggle around and market more targeted for that particular type of vehicle. In other cases, some of these OEMs are willing to even scrap these vehicles, dismantle them, take engines out, body parts, put them back on the shelf as used as new old stock parts, replacement, and they can salvage that and call it a write-off, scrap the rest. They won't want to risk the brand's reputation and selling them at such a low discount that it means hurting the brand's value. Every vehicle ultimately has a birth and an expiration date. And with all of that said, right there, you're going to check that. We're talking about some of the best cars this year for 2025. You're going to love it. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. See you all real soon. Bye-bye.